Hi, I'm David Colton, an executive editor at USA Today. We're here to talk about Ben Bradlee, and you've heard a lot about his influence on journalism and how many careers he started and stopped in some cases. We're going to talk a little more about the personal side of Ben Bradlee. Right now we have Rieder, who's our editor-at-large and media critic, and both of our bosses, Larry Kramer, the publisher of USA Today. And I wonder if I could ask, first of all, your personal encounter with Ben Bradlee when he hired you at the Post.
Well, my first encounter was a very memorable one. Larry, in fact, was responsible for it. He wanted me to leave the Miami Herald, where I was working, to become his deputy. Larry was the deputy metro editor at the Post. But I loved where I was, and I was in a great position. So Larry brought out the heavy artillery. He arranged for me to have lunch with Ben Bradlee. And I thought I'd been around. I thought I knew the world. I got the full Bradlee, and I would have done pretty much anything he asked. As we were going to lunch at a very expensive restaurant, he looked at me and he said, in that great Bradlee growl, he said, "Let's get this over with." And I was done.
And Larry, you helped recruit
I
Ren
did.
at the Post. What was it like working at the Post with?
Well, it was great. I mean, I got there in the mid '70s, right after the heavy Watergate stuff had happened, and it was this. Everybody wanted to be there. It was the sexiest place, and Ben was the sexiest editor in journalism. I mean, he defined dashing, and I didn't have a lot of in the first few weeks and months there. I didn't have a lot of connection with Ben. I was in the business staff. I was a young reporter, and a weird thing happened to me in my first month there. I was first few months there. Actually, I got married in Akron, Ohio that year. Still married to my wife of a few years, and we, you know how it's like being a young reporter. You have no money, so I combined the marriage trip to Akron with a story I was working on, so the Post would pay for my flight. And went out and did, I did the story. It was Firestone 500 tires then. And I came, we got married and went on the honeymoon. I came back, and about 2 weeks later, Ben walks over to my desk, which was a big deal for a young reporter. I really had never had a real single conversation with him. He goes, "I got to ask you a question." I said, "Well, what is it?" He goes, "What? He goes, you get married when you were out in Akron on that story?" I said, "Funny you should ask." I said, "Why?" He said, "We got this credit card bill for $1,500 because the words 'just married' were etched in the credit card." He goes, "Is that really true?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "That's the best story I heard this week. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it."
Folks say he loved that Jason Robards played him in the movie. Do you think?
He was perfect. I mean, maybe Rem disagrees, but I thought Robart did a perfect Bradlee. Had all the mannerisms, the walking down the room, he did so many things with just a touch. But Bradlee, I mean, he was actually somebody who was worthy of having Robards play him, I would think. Don't you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he captured kind of the magic of Ben. I used to watch Ben walk across the newsroom, and you kind of saw from that what the word charisma means. He would kibitz with a few people. He'd look at the lead of their story. He'd joke around, and he just electrified the place. And Robards completely captured that flavor.
How hands-on was he?
Well, by the time we were there, not hugely hands-on. His managing editor, Len Downey, kind of ran the day-to-day place. But we'd see Ben at the news meetings, and it was really interesting. He'd have Len deciding what was going on page one, but if something was going in a direction he didn't like, you could just, he wouldn't say it exactly, but his body language would indicate what he wanted. And by the end of the day, if he didn't like a certain story, it wasn't going out on page one.
But he had a real understanding of where the paper fit into the world of Washington. And I remember sitting next to him at those meetings for years, and I was running Metro. And we always had a front page, sort of a drawing of the front page then with where stories might be. It'd be the middle of the afternoon and where they were planning them for the next day. And he'd be doodling on them. And there were always one or two, and he would do these pretty balloons and draw them on there. And I never had the chutzpah to ask him, what was that all about? And then finally one day I said, okay, I got to ask you. I'm embarrassed to say I don't know what are you doing? What's with the balloons? He goes, those are trial balloons. I said, what? He goes, yeah, we're being used. That's where they come in and they give us this story because they want to see how the public's going to react, and if they react badly, they deny it. And I said, well, how do you feel about that? He goes, that's a price you got to pay to be on top, kid.
He had another mannerism that I thought was great. Often there'd be a story where the paper would be predicting that something was going to happen, And 2 days later, it turned out it didn't happen. The opposite happened. And Bradlee, in that great gruff way, would be muttering, it's a correction, it's a correction.
Today we call those clarifications.
But he used very small encounters with people to deliver very big messages. I mean, if he came over and said something great to you at your desk, it was just something you could live off of that for a month. I mean, he really knew how to make you feel terrific, and but he put a lot of pressure on. He also made you feel like, gee, I better get that right.
Now, in the early 1980s, another newspaper started across the river, USA Today, and there were famous feuds between Ben Bradlee and Al Newhart, the late publisher of USA Today. Ben Bradlee famously said, somebody asked him if he thought USA Today was a good newspaper, and he said, if USA Today is a good newspaper, I'm in the wrong business.
Right.
And that set off a feud for years between Newhart and Bradlee. And you were saying that Al used to like...
Oh, yeah, every time I was a media reporter at the Post around that time, going in just up to before the actual launch of USA Today, but they had announced it. And so I would go over and interview Al for stories, where he'd be buying a newspaper somewhere or he'd be talking about USA Today. And every time Al would end those interviews with, and something else, I want you to tell Bradlee something for me. And he would always have some dig that he would go on. But you know, I've seen them together a few times, and they were very warm and cordial to each other. And I think they both enjoyed the thing. They represented different things. And I was at the Post when USA Today was founded, and you know, I was a big advocate for what USA Today was doing, the design, the idea of using that. And a lot of the newspaper guys at the Post had a hard time with that things would change, and that something other than the longest possible stories were the best.
USA Today was everything the Post wasn't. They were gray, we were in color, we
Right.
were anti-Washington, they used sources, we didn't use sources, and
Right.
it was quite a schism. Many years later, I called Ben Bradlee for our 25th anniversary to say, you know, those remarks really hurt a lot of people in the newsroom, you know. And he said, oh, it was some wise-ass crack I made, I should just keep my mouth shut more. I have no problem with USA Today. It was just...
And he didn't,
me and
really.
Al, right.
But keeping his mouth shut wasn't really a big strength of Ben's. He just loved the one-liner. He loved to swear, and he couldn't help himself. But another interesting thing is, even though Ben and Al represented different kinds of newspapering to some extent, they were a lot alike in that they were both these larger-than-life magnetic characters, I think. And another aspect of Ben that I think Al would have liked is, a lot of people at the Post, you know, really like to focus on the serious, the heavy-duty stories, and Ben always had an eye as well. I think you would agree, for stories that were just interesting and that people would want to see. And when some of the really smart, sophisticated people were kind of putting these stories down, Ben would kind of grumble, "Nothing but readers, nothing but readers."
Well, I think we'd all agree almost no journalist would be working today without some influence and inspiration from Ben Bradlee and the work his staff did, and he personifies what a newspaper editor is. So thank you, Rem, and thank you, Larry, for being here.
My pleasure.
Hope
Thanks,
this
Dave.
gave a little look at the personal side of Ben Bradlee.